Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's a beautiful evening, and I hope it will end as well as it went. My name is John Sanford, and with Suzanne O'Brien, I am one of the co-chairs of the McGill Council on Palliative Care. Though many of you will know of our activities, I'll just do a brief summary. The Council was founded in 1994 by Cappy Flanders, and though she has recently passed on the role of chairing the Council, she continues to advocate passionately for palliative care. The objectives of the Council are to increase public awareness, public support, and availability of palliative care within and beyond the McGill Health Network. Some of our activities, which are always free and open to the public, include helping train volunteers, without whom the compassion, which is the hallmark of palliative care, would be much more difficult. We do 2 series of workshops each year aimed at providing the general public, particularly caregivers, with the practical understanding of what palliative care is, as well as how to gain access and make the most of what is available in our community. What is undoubtedly the highlight of our mission to reach out to the public is our annual lectures. We have been so fortunate to attract many world-renowned speakers who share their knowledge and their experiences. And I'm quite sure by the end of this evening, we'll have another one on our list. Each year, we alternate with Palliative Care Week and the Congress and give lectures at each. It is now estimated there are 8 million caregivers in Canada. That's an awful lot of people to advocate for. The Council this year decided to widen its advocacy beyond palliative care, and that's why we're addressing caregivers tonight. Our special thanks to the Palliative Care McGill, who is sponsoring tonight's event. Following the lecture, Donna Thomson will be glad to answer questions from the audience. We ask that you write your question down on the piece of paper that was handed to you when you came in, and members of the Council will come around and collect those questions at the end. We ask you also kindly to turn off your cell phones, and I would like to call on Dr. Lapointe to introduce our honored speaker of the evening.
Bonsoir à tous, bienvenue. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this other conference in our long series of lessons on living from the dying. I'm particularly pleased this evening on behalf of the academic program in palliative care at McGill to collaborate with the Council to this conference, public lecture. I am honored this evening to introduce Donna Thomson, who is a caregiver, author, and activist. She is the mother of 2 grown children, one who has a severe cerebral palsy and medical complexity. He has been receiving palliative care since 2004. Donna also cared for her mother, who passed away in the summer of 2018 at the age of 96. Donna is a board director of Kids Brain Health Network, and she is a leader and instructor in family engagement and health research. She also teaches family how to advocate for care at the Advocacy School in Ottawa and at huddle.com, an online community for caregivers. For the Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, Donna sat on the expert group addressing home and community care, the advisory committee to develop the white paper the expert group addressing home and community care, the advisory committee to develop the white paper on aging, and she was part of the working group on complex care for adults with developmental disabilities. Donna also blogs regularly at the Caregivers Living Room, and this is how I discovered her work and got to learn more about her engagement with caregivers and family caregivers. We were sharing just before how this is a commonality now in anyone who reaches the age of 50 or 55. I think that we all share an experience of caregiving, either for our parents, our spouses, and for some of us, for our children. Donna is the co-author with Dr. Zachary White of The Unexpected Journey of Caring, the Transformation of Loved One to Caregiver, that will be published, I think, very soon by Rowan and Littlefield. And she's the author of The Four Walls of My Freedom, Lessons I've Learned from a Life of Caregiving, published by McMaster and Co. in 2010, and The House of Ananti Press in 2014. Donna has accepted gracefully to sign copies of The Four Walls of My Freedom after tonight's lecture. It is with great pleasure that I ask you to welcome with me Donna Thomson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lapointe. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here this evening. So I'm going to try to remember how to do this. There. So I decided to call my lecture this evening, The Caregiving Effect, When Love Meets Necessity. And the first thing I think I would like to do is simply introduce you to my family. Caring in everyone's family is an endeavor that we all participate in. It's so embedded in our everyday lives that often we don't notice it as something that needs to be supported and something that we should be valuing and should be making more visible, I think. So this is us. This is me and my husband, Jim Wright, and our daughter, Natalie, who's 27 now. And this is our son, Nicholas, who turned 30 last August. And he's a very vibrant person, very funny and engaging, charismatic even, I would say. However, he has very severe disabilities and he is medically complex. And as I said, I'll tell the story a little bit about some of his health concerns that led him to the palliative care service in 2005. Oops, I went the wrong way there. So when Nicholas was born in 1988, we didn't know that he had cerebral palsy, but he began to have extreme irritability, difficulty sucking and swallowing, and finally we were able to get a diagnosis of a neurological injury. Subsequently, we learned that he has a very severe brain injury causing physical disabilities, epilepsy, gastroesophageal reflux, and other physical challenges that affect both him on the outside and on the inside. So he was pretty adorable. And here he is in, I think this was his nursery school yearly picture. And at this stage of the game, he was starting to experience very severe gastro difficulties, and he ended up with a diagnosis and many years, until about the age of 12, that he had something called pseudo-obstruction, which meant that he had all the symptoms of a bowel obstruction, but not because he had an obstruction, but because of his physical disability. He had dysmotility in the gut causing him to have those symptoms. So that required him to have very frequent hospitalizations and an intolerance of feeds. Nicholas began to experience orthopedic issues, dislocation of his hips. And this picture was when we lived in England. I'd say that it was about in 1997. This was the first of many, many orthopedic surgeries that did not go well. So his sister, that's Natalie, she's playing out her anxieties of her brother often being ill and often being in a plaster cast. And so this was her favorite game, to pretend that she was also in a cast. Caregiving, again, is something that affected our whole family over all the years of our children's lives. In this picture, with dear friends and family, at a happy occasion up at our cottage, Nicholas's hip is starting to dislocate, and this is his expression of pain. So after we began to have progressive surgeries and removal of the ball of his femur, that caused his femur to migrate upwards into his pelvis, causing extreme acute and chronic pain. So many of the pain management strategies that we tried, including bed rest, lots of opioids, a spinal cord intrathecal pain pump, phenol permanent nerve blocks, some of these strategies produced more pain, a neuralgia as a side effect. So with all of these things happening to Nicholas at once, we were given the diagnosis that he was actually at the end of his life. And this is the card that they gave our family, and this pen mark here is what the palliative care doctor at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario made that mark, saying Nicholas is here in his end of life progression. At that time, Nicholas was pretty much living in the hospital. We were having great difficulty managing his pain, and I was having particularly a lot of challenge trying to accept the fact that Nicholas was at potentially the end of his life, but also that he wasn't fixable, that he needed to lie down almost all the time. This is a child who had been in the adapted ski program. He won an award at high school for academic perseverance, even though he is non-speaking and has a developmental disability. And I felt that entering into the palliative care world represented failure and an absolute lack of hope for the rest of his life. So this is what his life looked like at this stage of the game. We ran a home hospital for him, an ICU environment at home, and Nicholas rarely got out of bed, but he was happy, and he's still alive, and he's still on palliative care after all these years, and he hasn't died in spite of many serious health crises between 2005 and now. Most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, he spent 3 weeks in the ICU due to septicemia as a result of an infected gallbladder, which he had removed. And, after that, this is what he looks like today. Maybe not today because his Liverpool Football Club lost in the Champions League final today. He might not be smiling, but he usually is a very smiley guy. Nicholas has a fantastic life, absolutely fantastic. He does many things. He runs a hockey betting pool for friends and family. He has lots of plans. He's got friends. He does go out in his chair for shorter periods of time, as long as he has lots of bed rest in between. he has a very rich life, even that one that continues in the ICU in the hospital. So living in palliative care limbo for so long, how should we feel as a family, and how should we feel as a circle of care? Nicholas's caregivers who look after him now outside of home 24 hours a day, awake nursing care, one-to-one, are part of our extended family. So we often ask each other, how should we be feeling? Should we feel hopeful right now? We asked ourselves that question a couple of weeks ago when Nicholas was coded in the emergency room and rushed up to be intubated in the ICU. Do we feel hopeful? Do we feel despairing? We never have an answer for that question. We live in the middle of hope and despair, and we find some way to exist there and to locate hope, but not turn away from despair if that's what's appropriate, because he has lots of crises, near-death events. So we endeavor to live well, given the givens of Nicholas's life and the givens of our family life. And Nicholas shows us the way. He is the one who says, I feel hopeful, Mom. I have plans. As soon as he woke up from being sedated, the doctor kind of got Nicholas, and again, Nicholas is not a speaking person. He doesn't have speech, but he's nevertheless a very good communicator. And the doctor was the best trauma surgeon in Ottawa and has a very funny, rather black sense of humor. And Nicholas has that same sense of humor. And so the doctor came in and said, "Hey, Nick, I woke you up because we're going to do surgery." And he said, I'm the doctor who's going to do the surgery, and don't you worry, I've been sharpening my knives. And Nicholas thought this is very funny, and so did we. Think it was hilarious. And so Nicholas said, "Great, well, you better fix me up because I have tickets for a Kiss concert in 2 weeks." And he made it to that concert, actually. You know, all of Nicholas's life, I have been someone who seeks and holds on to frameworks for understanding our experience with a very severe disability and palliative care, and holding on to those frameworks for understanding our experience and finding hope and finding resilience within those frameworks of thinking. So, what are the ideas that help me as Nicholas's primary caregiver and our whole family? What are those ideas that help us create and sustain a positive outlook? Well, the first idea that I want to share with you this evening is an idea called the capability approach. And the story of the capability approach is that I was in conversation with someone in the UK who is actually a scholar in development studies. And she was studying extreme poverty, and we somehow got talking, and I told her of my interest in finding frameworks for thinking about abundance within the circumstances of extreme chronic disease and severe disability. How can you locate ideas of abundance and love and richness of life in those circumstances? And she said, "I've got an idea that you might really like. It's called the capability approach." And the fellow who thought this up won the Nobel Prize in economics in 1998 for it. And so this economist's name is Amartya Sen. I had never heard of Sen's work. I had never heard of him. I thought it was a woman when my friend said his name for the first time. And so Sen described the approach this way. He said, the approach explored sees individual advantage not merely as opulence or utility, but primarily in terms of the lives people manage to live and the freedom they have to choose the kind of life they have reason to value. So he's talking about extreme poverty, and what he's saying is that household income doesn't give you or doesn't tell you anything about someone's quality of life. It's the choices that they have and the support that they have to make those choices within circumstances of great adversity. So the basic idea here is to pay attention to the actual capabilities that people end up having. These capabilities depend both on our physical and mental characteristics as well as on social opportunities and influences, given the givens, in other words. So freedom and choice are the main themes in the capability approach that constituted an aha moment for me in thinking about where we fit in society as a family, raising a son on palliative care. So the approach, and palliative care does this too, the approach shifts attention away from the medical model of disability to a view of personal freedom and the choices that one has, given the effects of impairment on those available choices. An approach that is a natural fit with palliative care and the values enshrined within it. So in Nicholas's case, he is palliative, but he is not at the end of his life. So how do we think about his life? How do we think about our family and where we fit into society and where we seek belonging and supports? So the capability approach was a revelation for me because before I understood how it might relate to our family and the way that I thought about looking for opportunities and facilitating his support, I thought my job was to look for what was available in the healthcare system and the social care system. I thought that was my job as his mom. And the capability approach taught me that no, that's wrong, because I was looking to somehow fit our needs with what was available in my community by on government services, community services. And I realized that's wrong. I need to look at what Nicholas really wants to do and be. I need to ask myself those questions for myself too. And every member of our family needs to ask themselves, what do you want to do and who do you want to be? And what kinds of supports do we need to do what we want to do? Given the givens. So I realized, we don't need to fit into the opportunities that exist. If there's a respite program that starts at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, we're never going to be there because Nicholas does not get up until noon. And so if that means that I have to go to the government and say, you know what, I'd rather have the money so that Nicholas can do what he wants to do from 1 to 3 p.m., that's what I'm going to ask for. I'm not going to give up because we don't fit into a public conception of what we should have. So another really neat framework that has been terrific for our family as well is something called the F words of childhood disability. And this is a framework for thinking about planning a good life for people who have severe disabilities and or are palliative and or are medically complex. It works for everybody anytime, including able-bodied, healthy people too, I think. It was a paper that was written by Dr. Peter Rosenbaum and Dr. Jan Willem Gerter at CanChild at McMaster University, and it went viral. So the F words of disability are function, family, fitness, fun, friends, and future. And everybody in the family gets to choose what they would put as activities and aspirations under each of those F words. So siblings get to, parents get to, anyone in the circle of care. We have always had people who were paid supports who become members of our extended family, many of them, and they would get to fill out the F words of disability collage for themselves too. So given that you are working full-time with Nicholas Wright, what do you want for your function? What do you want for your family? And many times in chronic care, in palliative care, people who are non-speaking, you can just imagine, and I'm sure you know personally, how communication and sharing the answers to these fundamental questions about how much time off do you want? You know, what about planning holidays? What are your expectations? What are your hopes for the next 2 years that you're going to be working with Nicholas? We never have these conversations, and the fact that we never have them with everybody in the circle of care can so often lead to misunderstanding and breakdown in the circle of care. So this framework, I think, is very helpful in that it can facilitate a meaningful conversation where everybody gets to have a say. So I asked Nicholas what his F words were. So for function, he said that I want to direct my own care. So that's a really important conversation that we have with him, because he can direct his own care some of the time. And some of the time he will make poor choices. And we cannot let him make choices that will lead to harm. So we have that conversation. I want to hang out with my family, but not all the time. That would be under the family domain. I want to do 3 outings a week. For him, sitting in his chair constitutes a fitness goal. So I want to organize hockey betting pools. That's for fun. I want to go hang out with John Michael. That's his new best friend. He loves John Michael. And I want a job. That's his future plan. So we look at this list and say, how can we support these goals and aspirations and choices and preferences? And we figure that out together. The extraordinary exists within the ordinary. Having the choice of what to do with circumstances of adversity can spell the difference between fulfillment and misery. So, you know, Nicholas is the greatest optimist. He is a real positivist. So even when we see a very diminished life, he lives it richly because he has plans. And he will make plans with very little evidence of possibility. He will locate it. I mean, he's the kid who, if this is a room full of poop, he says there's got to be a pony in there somewhere. And he needs allies to help him realize his dreams and aspirations. So, you know, when you live at home with someone on palliative care, as we did for 23 years, you're living in a lot of ways in a glass house, because there are so many medical and social care professionals coming in to assess all the time, and they view and they judge and they assess some more, and you are under a microscope, really, living in a glass house. And I often felt that we gave Nicholas over to the state when he got his diagnosis. We were no longer private parents making private decisions for our child. We had to ask what the options are, what other people's recommendations were, and God help you if you didn't follow those recommendations. You were labeled a difficult parent. So a lot of times I felt that our job was to agree with the professionals rather than just making a normal parenting choice. Nevertheless, if you look inside that little glass bottle, there is a family, there is love, there's a tree, and there's life. And, you know, here is Nicholas with one of his nurses who was on mat leave and brought her baby to meet Nicholas. And we don't have a separation between healthcare professionals and our family. They are all loving members of our circle of care, and we don't know what we would do without them. So they need support as much as we need support, as much as Nicholas needs support. Nicholas adapts his preferences. He does what he can. So here he is with a night of the hockey betting pool with friends and family together. Nicholas does this from his room lying down. This is his position that is most comfortable for him. Sitting hurts. So he is able to invite everyone in. I don't know if you can see it, but in the very behind Nicholas, this is a beer fridge. He invites everyone to have a cold one, and he is the host. What hindered us to have a good life with Nicholas? Well, needing to fail before we could succeed. The system today is one that, as we know, is a system of austerity in terms of what is available to support individuals and families who have complex care needs or are palliative. We need to put our hands up and say, we're not managing. We need help. And, you know, the first couple of times you ask, people might say, well, you look okay. You look really good. You look pulled together. Then you might need to go back several times and say, no, you don't understand. We are failing. We are falling apart. And then maybe they'll give you the help that you need. So that was difficult for me, and I know that it's difficult for other families, that you need to, in the case of a parent or, you know, maybe a spouse, you need to declare publicly that you can't manage before you're, you get the response that you want, which is, sure, we'll help you. We needed to fill out many, many, many forms. Forms are a hindrance to well-being. Goal-oriented evaluations were the worst. And in terms of chronic care over years, the government, in terms of if they're giving you individualized budgets, for example, you need to state the goals that you're hoping to achieve, and you need to give updates on how you've achieved those goals. And that's the transparency that the government needs for giving you a private budget to spend on health and social care. Those goal-oriented evaluations were based on the fact that they were based on the needs of the government, absolutely not on the needs of the family. And the work it takes to get a little help of anything. It's very hard work to advocate, and it takes many hours away from your loved one. And no one asked what we wanted to do or be in our community. So what helped? individualized funding, having choice, reduced workload, so our family needs before the needs of the institutions that were involved in funding our support, accepting and leveraging the opportunities of palliative care within the context of disability. I had to accept that Nicholas was palliative. What does that word mean? I was so afraid of that word. I was mixing it up with hospice, and as we know, it's not the same as hospice. I had to come to love our palliative care doctor it's particularly our doctor in England when we lived there, who made home visits very regularly and was the greatest help and support. He and I would sit in the living room and say, "What do you think? What do you think? What's going on here? What should we do? How can we tweak the pain meds?" And he was my absolute partner in care. It was a great support. A warm welcome in our neighborhood. Boy, belonging locally with your neighbors, that's very important. And when my neighbors delivered food when Nicholas was in the hospital, or they knew that we were having a very hard time, that was worth its weight in gold. Just friendship in the neighborhood. And the demonstrations of caring and the F words of disability approach for our whole family. So institutional support working with our family. And it starts with hello. When Nicholas moved out of home, we were moving home from England, and this is the airport. The night that we moved back from the UK to Canada back home here, we knew we already had Nicholas's home identified, and he was all set to be a resident. I won't even go into the background of how we got that. It was a big advocacy effort, but we managed it. He lives now in the Ottawa Rotary home with 24/7 one-to-one nursing care. And this is the welcome that we had at the airport. So, and when we arrived, our friends, our family all came to welcome us home to Nicholas's new home. The welcome was amazing. We felt loved, we felt hugged, we felt surrounded by care. So that's all fine and good if you can get all of that, and you can think about your life in a way that seems hopeful, it seems fulfilling, and it seems strong. You begin to think about your life in a way that feels like the possibility of resilience, the possibility that you will walk through suffering with your loved one. You will survive after they die, somehow. But together, you will walk this journey and we all know how it ends, but we will go together with love and with welcome. So that's fine, but we need practical tools to help us live day to day with palliative, chronic, complex care. So two of the online platforms that I wanted to describe this evening that help us to do that in the living with palliative care in the community, there are two that are in Canada. These are online care coordination platforms that help coordinate a circle of care that consists of both family and medical professionals. So in our family, we use Ties Personal Networks, and Nicholas's GP and all of his nursing staff are on Ties. We share all of his medical records there. So it is HIPAA compliant, which means that it has bank grade data security. Ties is owned by St. Elizabeth Healthcare, which is a national healthcare provider. And so it is designed to bridge hospital to home. It is designed to enable informal and formal caregivers to work together in a coordinated fashion to support someone with care needs in the community. And there's a new one out which is also excellent, called Care Relay. These are both Canadian platforms, because if you're storing medical records, you need to do that in country of origin. So the data needs to be stored in Canada, and both of these tools do that. So the individual model of care would be doctor to patient, but we know that life doesn't happen that way. But a lot of institutional supports are set up that way. So the network model of care includes the service providers in the healthcare system, clinicians, home care nursing, pharmacists, therapists. But natural supports would include the family and maybe neighbors that are very close. And we need to find ways where we can communicate amongst the stakeholders who are there to help, and we need to find ways to communicate that the daughter is going to bring the mother to a doctor appointment, and that's going to happen at a certain time so everyone doesn't wonder who's going to do this or assume that someone's going to do it who isn't. There are just so many opportunities for things to go wrong unless communications are coordinated. So this is what Nicholas's Ty's page looks like, his home page. There's secure online file storage, so a virtual filing cabinet, a calendar, which is so important to share doctor appointments, but also things that Nicholas wants to do for fun that are important to him. So he might be going to a movie with his Uncle Jerry one day, and we need to know that. Everybody needs to know that because he needs a lot of support to do anything. People can send requests for help, to order supplies, say. Messages, people can send messages. We often use the messaging feature to communicate with the doctor about symptoms. And for example, I have a note here pinned to the page, ICU's do's and don'ts. So Nicholas, we all are with Nicholas in the ICU, but our team is so used to working his feeding pump and his oxygen saturation monitors and so forth, and doing his tube feeds. They're so used to doing these things, but in the ICU, you do not touch anything. Don't turn off an alarm. So this is how we communicate with the staff so that we don't have to hope that these messages get through and that our staff are going to be made unwelcome in the ICU. That would be terrible for Nicholas because they read him best and they interpret his pain and his symptoms to the ICU staff. So we are also able to take photos of skin issues, send them to the GP. The GP will order a swab, put this prescription back in a message. It all happens. The prescription the lab results come back, they're posted in a file in Ty's, and the prescription is then given by his nursing staff, and Nicholas has never left home, and he's never seen the doctor. We do that with skin stuff that we can take pictures of. So another really great tool, I think that helps people a lot, certainly helped our family in the community, is something called care mapping. And this is a fantastic tool. It's a whole suite of resources for caregivers, developed by a man called Rajiv Mehta in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And he created a website called the Atlas of Caregiving, where anyone can go and learn how to draw their own care map. and it's representative of an ecosystem of care. So there may be multiple people being cared for, including aging parents, pets, sisters, brothers, a palliative care spouse. There are multiple caring roles and responsibilities that everybody has within that care ecosystem. And this technique of drawing it really helps to understand where the gaps are, what the strengths are, and what potential does that ecosystem of care have for creating a good life. And I encourage you to have a look at this website, because you can draw, of course you can draw with pencil and paper, which they really strongly advocate that you begin by doing it on pencil and paper. But then there's a whole, once you get the idea of how to draw a care map, then you can do it online. And the best thing about this are the questions for reflection. And you can do it with a group of people. And it becomes a community building tool for care and the understanding of ever-widening ecosystems of care. It's very innovative, and this is an award-winning strategy for caregiving families in communities everywhere. So some of those really interesting questions for reflecting on a care map: who is indispensable and what happens if they're not available? And often that means, as a principal primary caregiver, what happens if I get sick? That's a terrifying possibility for all caregivers. Like, we're not allowed to get sick because no one else knows how to do, and my loved one only wants me. So these are complicated questions. Are the different people aware of each other's involvement? What are the different kinds of care and skills that people are providing? How are responsibilities divided amongst different people? And how do you communicate, coordinate, and negotiate issues with everyone? You can see that if you begin to talk out the answers to these questions, it can be quite a revelation, but it can also take time and many visits back to your care ecosystem to reflect again and again, because of course it's a living thing. It's always evolving. We cannot change the outcome, but we can affect the journey. And I love this quote because in the context of palliative care, of course, we can't change the outcome. We know that we're all going to die one day, but we can affect the journey throughout our lives, including at the end of our lives, including within the context of complex care and severe disability. And we can aspire to have an ordinary life, and we can have choice within that ordinary life, and that it's always, always fueled by love in the family. So that's my presentation, and I warmly welcome questions from the audience.
I see some questions being written. Yes.
You and I were talking about the ordinary life because this idea originated in Australia,
Yeah.
where you're from.
Yes. I love that idea. And I remember my brother-in-law always used to say, we live in a world today where everyone wants to be extraordinary, when really most of us are just ordinary, and how we should embrace ordinary. That I think there is great, I love that expression, and an ordinary life and a fortunate life.
Yes.
The same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Let us assume that your son would outlive you, or your spouse, or whoever, and you become incompetent, and his sister is no longer in the picture. How will you ensure Nicholas's continuity of care and his quality of life until his death? That's the questions you were just asking us to reflect on.
I'm going to say in about 2002 or so, I became interested in a model of support that was developing and originated in Canada called Planned Lifetime Advocacy Networks. And Plan, I know there are people from Plan here this evening, Plan began with a group of families who asked themselves, what will happen to my child with disabilities after I die? And this was a particularly pressing question for them because our children are the first generation of children with disabilities who will outlive their parents. This is an absolutely new phenomenon in society, and society is not prepared for aging people with disabilities. So Alet Mansky and Vicky Kamak, two people who were very instrumental in creating Plan, created a model of support that is called a coordinated network of personal support, one that is designed to last for the lifetime of an individual who has ongoing care needs. So I ended up co-founding the Plan affiliate in Ottawa and creating a circle of support for Nicholas that will outlive us. And many of the people who are in that circle of support are former caregivers who looked after Nicholas with us at home, or were camp counselors for him, but they befriended Nicholas and befriended our family and have never lost touch. They've been the most loyal, loving friends. And they together with my daughter and my nieces, are going to be the next generation of Nicholas's immediate family.
Thank you. Here's one who comments, very inspirational talk, thank you. And on the personal level, you're in a very difficult position as a mother, and it's normal as a mother to have negative feelings. How were you able to let that negative energy out? What worked for you, and how can you remain that calm? Or are you always this calm?
No, no, I'm not always this calm. And I think the hardest part was with uncontrolled pain and exhaustion combined. Then I was not okay at all. I certainly wasn't calm. I was crying all the time. I felt that I was a very bad mother and a very bad caregiver. I was so tired. I was making medication errors, getting into fender benders all the time, and desperate that I couldn't control Nicholas's pain. So I think that was the hardest time. Uncontrolled pain is really a monstrous thing, and as palliative care people here know very well. And so I think those were the darkest times, and it's just simply impossible to locate hope and resilience and anything else when you're that tired and someone you love, adore, is having pain that is not controllable, and they are asking you to help them, and you can't. You don't have the tools to help. So there's no question that sometimes times are very, very desperate, and I've written about that, I think, with a lot of candor in my book. Once we got the pain under control, though, it was Nicholas who just reached into the black mire and yanked me out of it, because he said, "Okay, Mom, I feel better. Let's have some fun." And he really was the strong one and the inspiration for all of us to say, okay, whatever comes next we can manage as long as the pain is controlled. And so, yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Perfect. There's and the same audience member says that Liverpool won 4-0 tonight. So
They did? I thought they were down 3-0.
Well, Liverpool won.
Wow.
So Nicholas should be happy.
That's so great. Yes.
Here's a couple of questions on technology. What are your thoughts on the potential and challenges of internet and mobile technologies for complex caregiving families?
That's really an interesting question. I think that technologies can be a wonderful thing as long as they are there to support face-to-face contact and love. I think what worries me are caregiving robots. My friend Vicky Kamak, who has co-founded Plan, she and I do a lot of writing together, and we're working on an article called "Waiting for My Robot" to come and get me to the toilet, whatever. And I think that if we begin to believe that machines can care better than people, we're in trouble. Mm-hmm. But I think that the extent to which we do a lot of hard labor, of lifting and of staying awake longer than humans should, when I think of the technology that supports Nicholas, the feeding pump, so we don't have to do bolus feeds, the intrathecal pain pumps, so we don't have to give him heavy doses of opioids, injectables. When I think of the technology that supports him, the oxygen saturation monitors that make sure that he stops breathing regularly, and the monitoring that brings care to him, that's great. So I feel ambivalent about it, but I'm mainly grateful and hopeful.
So in the two digital care networks that you mentioned to us, TIES and Care Relay, what's the most important feature on those platforms that you've liked, and is there something that's missing if we go into this world of digital mapping or putting our sort of care connections online? I
think there are two most important features. One is that our paid medical professionals are part of our care network online. So we have access to information sharing, and that the information sharing that occurs around Nicholas's care is on an equal playing field. There's no little group that has all the knowledge. Everybody has the same access to the same information, so it's a democracy of knowledge and information sharing. So that between paid professionals and family. So that's really, really important. And the other main important thing is the shared calendar. So we know what's happening when. And everybody, does Nicholas have a pain pump refill today? Let me look. And I can look, and so can Nick's bus driver. So all of that is available on people's phones, on mobile phones. So that's really, really key. And one of the barriers, though, to using these care coordination networks is that medical professionals are very reluctant to use them. So we had an extraordinary GP who actually said to me one time, I'm really okay with uncertainty. I wanted to wash his feet with my hair because he said, you know, anytime you don't know what's going on, we will work through it together. And he said, I don't know, but, you know, if you're not sure whether to call 911 or do nothing, we will figure this out together based on our best guesses together. And to me, that's the way exactly what I needed and what Nicholas needed and what I wanted, and this tool facilitates that.
This is a room of caregivers. We're all caregivers. How many have heard of any of these kind of resources? One. Yeah, there's a lot. So what do you think is the biggest barrier to people learning about this kind of stuff?
I think that two things. One is that reluctance on the basis of privacy, on the basis of a distrust of caregivers to manage medical records, to manage, and patients too. I mean, now we have my chart and everything, and that's great, but it's not a two-way conversation.
Right. Yes.
So, and even then, it takes 2 weeks for my chart for your test results to appear, because they don't want you to read your test results before you've talked through them with your doctor, which is fine, except that I think that, you know, families who are running home ICUs, like our family did, we are not alone. There's a lot of people out there who are delivering, families who are healthcare providers, delivering all kinds of what used to be nursing. Families are doing this. They're making the school lunch, walking the dog, and even doing dialysis, like nursing. And so when we present to medical professionals, we expect to be treated like the experts we are. And I think that's very difficult for many people who are not in regular contact with our community. And I think that's one of the reasons that there isn't a great uptake on these new tools.
Something to plan for. There's one question that the writer has said you do not need to answer if you don't want to, but has Nicholas ever indicated if he would want to cease interventions at any time?
Oh yeah, he sure has. Especially, he said, he said in 2004, I never want another surgery. I never want another surgery, which is one of the reasons he tries to hide his symptoms, because he says he doesn't want to tell anybody he's got a headache, because he thinks that he's going to the hospital to have surgery if he says that he has anything wrong with him. So the last time he was in the hospital last month, we had to have the conversation that, Nicholas, you need to have your gallbladder out. You need to have a scope to clear a massive infection in your bile duct. And if you don't have these, you will die. And so I said, you know, but you need to tell us what you want to do. We would never do any more corrective surgeries, spinal rods for his scoliosis. Nope. No more rehab surgeries. Life-saving surgeries, we ask him every time. And he said, yes, he wanted that surgery. But he was also very convinced by this bravado doctor who said, I'm the best in the business, I'm going to fix you. And that KISS concert, you're going to be there. So he had that kind of a conversation. But I think that, yes, he has told us in no uncertain terms that he doesn't want any more elective surgery. That is for sure.
Well, thank you. I love your expression, given the givens. I think that's something we can all live by. We live with the circumstances that we don't always ask for. We have capacities that we sometimes don't know the depth of, but given our givens and the idea of how do we maximize an ordinary life, an ordinary sense of fulfillment of who we are and who we need to be as patients, as caregivers, as supporters, as healthcare workers, is something I think to reflect on each and every day. Thank you for inviting us to reflect on those possibilities. I wrote it down, given the givens. I want to go home and think of what are the givens in my life, and how do I work with those. So I thank you, Donna, for an amazing personal story, imbued with a lot of wisdom about how we as healthcare workers in the system can help caregivers like yourself, like your family, and with Nicholas, to be better at embracing that circle of care. So thank you for those insights and that. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Council on Palliative Care, we have a little gift for you to remember us by. And my final comments tonight go back to those earlier slides, and you've got a handout in your takeaway package on the Imagine Week that's coming up in October. I invite everyone in this room to go on to the Imagine website, imagineweek.ca, semaneimagine.ca, and sign up for our newsletter. This is a week of conversations on possibility. Imagine if we had a community where, like Donna today, that the circle of care was there. If we could have honest and shared conversations and know what to say to support somebody through dying, through loss, through grief. Imagine what that would be like for us, for those that we love, and for the community in which we live in. So this is going to be an amazing week, a festival of end-of-life issue topics, looking through the lens of art and science and music and photographs and spirituality and faith, many domains, to just inspire us to ask those questions within. Look at our own givens and how do we feel comfortable caring for others and caring for those that we most love around the issues of loss and grief. So go on to the Imagine website, sign up. You might have an idea for an event, but sign in with your email. You all put down an email address tonight, I think, on when you registered. We'll send you all of the information. But go onto the website and there's a category, sign for our newsletter. Hear all about it, share it with your friends and family, or maybe you want to volunteer at one of our events. There's a volunteer button there as well. This is the way we create space in our community. This is the way we open the possibility of a conversation that's important. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to Donna. Thank you to my co-chair, John Sanford, to Dr. Lapointe, to all of the council members. And mostly I thank you for coming out and sharing with us this evening these questions, and go home and take care of the ones you love. Take care. Bye.